Recently, we saw very interesting headlines all over the news related to AI. The headlines mostly read MIT study shatters AI hype. 95% of generative AI projects are failing. AI is a bubble, etc. etc. This was really interesting and intriguing for me as I'm super focused on various aspects of AI. So I decided to read the complete report myself and find out the truth about 95% failure rate in AI projects. Hello and welcome. I'm Pranjal. In this video, I'll go through the report from MIT and later give you my take on the same topic. So let's dive in. The report is called The Gen AI Divide State of AI in Businesses 2025. The report has been published by MIT NANDA. Before we go into the report, if you don't already know what MIT NANDA is, NANDA is an acronym for Network Agents and Decentralized AI. It is an ambitious MIT initiative for developing a foundational infrastructure for a true Internet of AI agents. Okay, so coming back to the report, basically the report has been prepared based on 52 structured interviews across enterprise stakeholders, systematic analysis of 300 plus public AI initiatives and announcements, and survey with 153 senior leaders collected across 4 major industry conferences. And this report, the research period for the report was January to June 2025. So this report has broadly been broken down into 6 different sections, but they cover a lot of very interesting aspects in this report. For example, they start from how AI is impacting different industries, and then how the industries are actually using or implementing AI solutions, right? And then they go on to define a new term which is called shadow AI, which is very interesting. I'll come to that. And then they also investigate the difference in investment patterns for successful or non-successful AI experiments, right? And then they also kind of bring out the barriers to implementing AI solution at scale, and how the learning gap in the tools is kind of leading to this failed and successful divide within the companies, right? And then they kind of explore the best practices for buying the AI solution, and is finally they also kind of investigate if it is impacting the jobs in these companies or not. So it's going to be very interesting paper, very interesting report for us to go through. Let's go into the deeper sections in there. So the main highlight, which is in the executive summary section, the main highlight of the report is despite 30 to 40 billions in enterprise investment into Gen AI, which has gone in this year itself, this report uncovers a surprising result that 95% of organizations are getting zero return. So this is the text where all of these headlines are coming from. Basically 95% of projects in AI are failing. The outcomes are so starkly divided across both buyers and builders that they call it Gen AI divide. Just 5% of the integrated AI pilots are extracting millions in value, while the vast majority remain stuck in no measurable P&L impact. The divide does not seem to be driven by model quality or regulation, but seems to be determined by approach. So basically, all throughout the report, they talk about Gen AI divide, which they kind of define as the gap between a small minority, almost 5% of organizations that manage to scale AI successfully, achieve ROI, workflow integrations, and structural change, and large majority, almost 95% of enterprises that invest heavily in AI pilots but fail to realize business value. They're stuck in pilots, misallocating budgets, and facing adoption barriers. So basically, when the difference between these two types of the orgs are within this report, they analyze the difference between these two types of orgs, and they identified that the core barrier to scaling AI is not infrastructure or regulation, but basically it is learning. Most Gen AI systems do not retain feedback, adapt to context, or improve over time. That's the bottom line finding by them. And so basically buyers who succeed, they kind of identified those buyers as well. We'll talk about all of those sections in detail now. So in this section, they talk about which industries are adopting and which industries are able to transform or which are not getting transformed. So basically they have kind of, developed a composite AI market distribution index, which had 5 dimensions and they scored various industries on a scale of 0 to 5 on all of those 5 dimensions. Based on this, they found that media and tech are being disrupted most currently, followed by professional services. Other industries such as healthcare, financial services, consumer and retail are not much impacted due to AI. For example, in this section, they've quoted a CEO from manufacturing mid-market manufacturing CEO summarized the prevailing sentiment as the hype on LinkedIn says everything has changed, but in our operations, nothing fundamental has shifted. We are processing some contracts faster, but that's all that has changed. So basically, some of the industries are not seeing any change due to AI, but some industries are, which is what this section talks about, that media and tech are pretty much getting disrupted, but rest of the industries are not even kind of seeing any change, substantial change there. So now we are coming to the most important section of this report. I mean, so this is the section from which all of those 95% failure rate kind of headlines have been picked up. So basically, before I go deeper into the chart and details that they've provided, let's read the research limitations, which I've highlighted in pink, or whatever color you want to call it, magenta or pink or whatever. These figures are directionally accurate based on individual interviews rather than official company reporting. Sample sizes vary by category, and success definitions may differ across organizations. So this is very subjective. Okay, but still, let's look at the chart that they've got here. So they've got a chart here which kind of segregates, kind of measures how successful are general purpose LLMs, for example ChatGPT or Claude based chat interface, versus task specific Gen AI, the applications that industries are developing for themselves based on these models, this customized applications that are being developed. So those two are compared here. So for example, 80% of the respondents kind of from the total pool size had at least investigated ChatGPT kind of interface, which probably is a little low from my perspective. I mean, it should have been 100%, but then 80% is fine. And out of those, from 80%, 50% are kind of piloting that, right? And then 40% went on to successful implementation. They're using ChatGPT or off-the-shelf tools like chat-like tools in their organization, which is 40% is still a very low number. But I think, at least, from 50% who piloted, 40% are using. So it's almost 80% people who have successfully, kind of 83%. That's what they've said later on, I think. Yeah. So they've said 83% of people have actually kind of implemented those off-the-shelf tools. Now, the bigger point, which is being, published across all the journals and reports and everywhere. So out of these people who were part of this survey, only 60% kind of investigated whether they wanted to develop a custom solution based on these LLMs. For example, OpenAI's models or Claude models or Grok models, right? Did they want to implement custom solutions? 60% of them investigated. And then out of 60%, only 20% went on to get into a pilot stage. They tried to develop something and they went into the pilot stage. So that drop itself is huge, right? But out of those 20% who piloted, 5% were able to successfully implement it. So this 5% is not out of those all 100%. It is like out of these 20%, only, so basically it's like 25% of the people who piloted, they were able to successfully implement, which is a huge, at least a very decent number of successful implementations. I mean, 25%. So basically, I mean, the report highlights that 95% failure rate. But if we look at these numbers very closely, unless I'm missing out something completely, the way they've compared it here, for example, for ChatGPT, generic LLM chat bots appear to show high pilot to implementation rates, which is 83%, right? High pilot to implementation, basically 50% to 40%, almost 83%, whatever they're saying, right? If we compare task-specific Gen AI solutions, also based on those numbers, 20% people tried, 5% people were successful. That means 25% success rate, right? So why are they kind of saying 95% failure rate? That I totally do not understand. Maybe that was to hype up the report. Maybe that's what the news outlets picked up. But basically, for me, 25% success rate with a custom application at this point where LLMs are still evolving. I mean, they've not. It's only been a year or year and a half almost, right, since when the LLMs have come in. So 25% success rate at these applications would themselves have taken a lot of time to implement, probably 6, 7, 8 months, right? So if they are successful already, I think that's a huge success rate rather than depicting it as 95% failure rate. So that's the biggest. I mean, there are a lot of good things in this report. We'll go through that going forward, but this was something which was completely misrepresented as far as I can understand. Maybe there's some other meaning of it from this which I don't understand correctly. But what I get from here is, yeah, it's like 25% success rate rather than 5%. Okay, so now moving forward to the next sections. This we have discussed a lot. They've got 5 myths about Gen AI, which is very interesting. I'll cover that separately. So basically, the next section talks about shadow AI economy. Shadow AI is a very interesting term that they've coined. So shadow AI is defined as where employees use personal ChatGPT accounts, cloud subscriptions, or other consumer tools to automate significant portions of their jobs, often without IT knowledge or approval. Even the scale of shadow AI is remarkable. Only 40% of the companies in survey mentioned that they purchased official LLM subscription, which we saw in the previous chart as well. 40% of companies purchased those chat LLMs, right? But then almost 90% workers from over 90% of these companies were surveyed and reported regular use of personal AI tools for work tasks. So basically, yeah, so like I was surprised to see that only 80% of them kind of exploded, right? And then only 40% implemented it, the chat LLM kind of interfaces. But internally the employees are all 90% of employees are already using those kind of tools. So they've got a chart here where it says that employees who use chat LLMs regularly is, I mean, when they say LLM, they mean chat kind of UI with LLMs, right? And companies that have purchased. So that is what the shadow AI economy is. Okay, so going to the next sections now. So basically, they also investigated investment patterns in which verticals most of the money is going into. So basically, they found that most of the investment is going towards sales and marketing, not only because of visibility, but also the outcomes can be measured easily rather than legal or procurement or finance kind of functions that offer subtle efficiencies. So essentially, they're saying that most investment is going towards highest ROI opportunities, whereas there is a lot of efficiency gains that can be made in back office functions, but they are not being funded properly. Then in the report, they try to look at some of the main reasons why projects are stalling at pilot stage, and their finding is basically so one of the major points for failure of those projects is people are unwilling to adopt new tools. That's like the most frequent reason. And then model output quality concerns. So people think that the model that are being used to develop those custom applications for them are not good enough, and then poor user experience. So the tools which are being developed, they are not giving a very good user experience, so people are kind of not adopting that, right? And lack of executive sponsorship, challenging change management. So obviously change management is going to be difficult. This is a very different kind of tool. So basically, yeah, so these were the top 5 reasons because of which the custom AI applications that enterprises are developing are not being adopted. They are kind of being discarded at the pilot stage itself. And then some of the very key things that they've highlighted here is the same professionals using ChatGPT daily for personal tasks demand learning and memory capabilities from enterprise work. A significant number of workers already use AI tools privately, reporting productivity gains, while their company's formal AI initiatives stall. The shadow usage creates feedback loop. Employees know what good AI feels like, making them less tolerant to static enterprise tools. So that is one of the reasons that their employees are giving why they're not adopting the tools. Also, then in the next section, they point out generic tools are winning. However, the tools developed for the industry are not being adopted. So basically, they've kind of tried to figure out user preferences here. User preferences drivers. The most frequent driver is basically the answers are better. So the employees are saying that the answers they get from Chat GPT kind of tools or LLMs directly are better compared to the enterprise tools that are being developed for them. Although the enterprises are saying that they're using the same models pretty much. Maybe it's the difference in the prompting strategy or something, but so employees are saying the answers from the chat LLMs are a lot better, already familiar with interface. So they're familiar because they've been using that interface for last year or so, probably more. That's why they've got that's where the human learning part comes into play, which is why AI adoption would be a lot slower, because it takes a lot of time for us to adapt to new changes. So that's already being talked about here, and they trust it more. I don't know why they would trust it more, because if the enterprise is developing it for them, the trust should be with the enterprise tool rather than an open tool. But then, yeah, that's what they figured in the survey as well. Then they further wanted to explore why those enterprise tools are failing. So they say it forgets context, doesn't learn, and can't evolve. For mission critical work, 90% of the users prefer humans. Gap. So basically, looking at this chart here, so this chart kind of represents the barrier to core workflow integration, right? So basically, it doesn't. So employees are saying that the tools that enterprises are developing for them is not learning from their feedback. Is They have to provide a lot of context to those tools. I don't know why, because if it's specifically been developed to do a particular task, I don't know why more context would be required with the tools. I would think chat LLMs would require more context, but the finding is just opposite. Can't customize it to. So basically, it seems like the tools which are being developed by enterprises are very, very brittle. They are not easily customizable for their workflows as well. So it seems like the experiments are not going deeper. The ones that are failing are not going very deeper, not doing deep customizations, and not very adaptable as well. And then going to the next section. So this is where they kind of explore perceived fitness for high stakes work. So basically, if you've got quick tasks like emails, summaries, and basic analysis, would you prefer delegating it to a human or to a AI? And then for more complex tasks, for example, multi-week work, client management kind of tasks, would you want to delegate it to AI or to humans? So basically, 70% of the people say that they are willingly delegating tasks to AI when they're quick tasks like emails, summaries, and basic analysis. They are getting delegated to AI more, like 70%, and to humans lesser, almost 30%. But for complex projects, for long run tasks, we know that AI does not perform really well right now. So only 10%, I don't know how even these 10% are able to delegate, but so it says that 10% are able to delegate even week-long tasks to AI, whereas 90% of people are delegating it to humans, which is understandable because AI is still not very good with such long horizon tasks, for example, multi-week kind of tasks. Okay, so then going to the next section. In this section, how the best builders succeed. So basically, they try to figure out what exactly these 25% or 5% of the people are doing, which is leading to successful implementation. So basically, they find out from the surveys that customized, adaptive, embedded systems that learn from feedback are more successful. Companies that are successful are building applications in narrow but high value use cases, integrate deeply into workflows and scale through continuous learning rather than broad feature sets. So those were the key findings here. Let's go further down here. So basically, AI systems that do not generate content but learn and improve within the environment, they are being preferred. They are working. So how executives select Gen AI vendors? So that's a very interesting thing, how they're selecting the vendor. So one of the top criteria is they're selecting the vendor that they trust. They don't really care about the expertise on AI side. The topmost criteria is the vendor that they trust, and then deep understanding. So if so the vendor who they trust and who understands their workflow are the most preferred vendors. They are not kind of relying just on the technical expertise. Minimal disruption to current tools, clear data boundaries, ability to improve over time, flexibility. So those kind of vendors who are providing these values are being preferred for implementing Gen AI solutions. We are more likely to wait for our existing partner to add AI than gamble on a startup. So these companies are not willing to, kind of not preferring to gamble with a startup. They want their preferred vendor to learn AI and deliver it to them rather than, going. So next, going to the next section, basically the winning playbook for crossing the divide. So basically, startups that successfully cross the Gen AI divide land small, visible wins in narrow workflows, and then expand. Tools with low setup burden and fast time to value outperform heavy enterprise. So that is the right way to build, because AI is kind of evolving super fast, right? And you want to deliver a tool which probably the most critical part of the project, but it has to be a narrow, useful workflow, which when enabled via AI, you would get to know whether it's working for the employees or not. I mean, it shouldn't be very critical workflow, because if that gets disrupted, doesn't work, then it'll completely hamper their work, right? So it has to be a narrow, non-critical workflow. You implement there, and then you observe how people are using it. Is it working for them or not? If it's not, then you adapt it and make it, better and things like that. And once they're used to using it, they will also start liking it. And then you expand to more cover more areas. So then going to the next section. So basically in this section, they talk about, basically they mention that next 18 months are going to be critical. Companies need to switch to agentic AI based systems with frameworks like NANDA and MCP, the system that can learn, adapt, and be more flexible. So they are kind of recommending agentic AI kind of applications with memory, so that when people are interacting with those systems are kind of flexible. Plus, they are learning while the interaction with the users is happening. The systems have to learn and then adapt and become better over time. So then coming to the last section of this report, basically, so in this section, they talk about how to buy or procure AI-based solutions. Okay, so the first point that they make is, according to the survey, in-house development is only half as successful as solutions provided by external developers. So basically, in 67% times, customized tools which were developed with external partnerships were successful, whereas 33% were built internally were successful. And then basically they talk about, according to them, while buying solutions act like BPO clients and not SaaS customers. So basically what they're saying is, don't buy things which are like just off the shelf. You have to customize it. You have to kind of know exactly what you want, and you need to do a lot of deeper customizations to get what exactly you need, right? So basically that's what they've said here, and then they've kind of mentioned it here as a highlight as well. Demand deep customizations aligned to internal processes. Benchmark tools on operational outcomes, not on model benchmarks, which is very important, because models are being benchmarked with a lot of compared with a lot of benchmarks, but ultimately whether I use that model for my application or not, or whether I use the application built on that model or not, should depend on my own operational outcomes and not on model benchmarks, which is absolutely true. Partnered through early stage failures. Treating deployment as co-evaluation. Absolutely. So this is a very key and critical point. If you are developing an AI application, it's not like we were doing application building, like web application, things like that, because once you've defined the requirements for web application, more or less you'll get that, and you know how it has to be used, right? Then you'll ask the employees to adapt to that. But in case of AI, because AI is probabilistic, it will make a lot of mistakes when you even move it to let's say pilot. So which is where it has to be, the vendor who's providing it needs to be involved even after you've piloted or gone live, because they have to completely understand how it's being used and then adapt the let's say prompts, or let's say the interface, to make it more usable. So this is very important point where they say it has to be partnered through early stage failures, and and then source AI initiatives from frontline managers. And okay, so that's a very important point. Basically what's happening is, a lot of top level managers are kind of giving the requirements based on which applications are being developed, but ultimately the employees or users who are actually going to use the tool, if they're already using chat LLM or chat GPT or things like that, they're already getting a flavor of AI, right? Now, if they are stakeholders, or if they are able to define the functional requirements of the new tools that would help them do their job better, then they will have more stakes in it, and they'll probably use it more, and they'll probably be able to define it better than the managers sitting at the top. So that's what they're saying. The frontline AI initiatives, central lab should not define the functionality. It should be the people who are actually going to use it. And even within the subset of people who are going to use it, you need to look for people who are already using AI to enhance their productivity, because they are the right kind of people who know how AI can help make them more productive. And then they talk about max ROI is achieved in back office automation and not on front office usage. Basically, they've given some numbers here as well. So for example, BPO elimination, that led to $2 to $10 million saving. Agency spend reduction 30%. So basically, a lot of AI usage is being pushed to sales and marketing or front office kind of work. But they're saying a lot of back office work can be automated, and that's where there'll be a lot of saving. And then in the last section, they talk about the job impact. So basically, they say that the executives were hesitant to reveal the scope of layoffs, but they're saying between 5 and 20% of kind of jobs were lost in these customer support operations and administrative work. However, in the sectors showing minimal structural disruption, the sectors that we identified initially, right? Healthcare, energy, advanced energy, advanced industries, most executives report no current or anticipated hiring reductions. Obviously, these sectors are not seeing any disruption due to AI. I mean, very minimal disruption due to AI. So they are not kind of even thinking about, reducing their hiring or any impact on hiring. But the sectors that are getting impacted, for example, technology and media, has demonstrable measurable impact. 80% of executives anticipating reduced hiring volumes in next 24 months. So hiring is going to be, as per this report, or the people who participated in this survey, they thought that, at least when they were in media and technology sectors, they thought that there will be a measurable impact in next 24 months in terms of hiring. And they consistently emphasize AI literacy as so basically the people who they are going to hire, or the future hires, there's a very important point that they're mentioning. They expect the next level of people, the people that they are hiring need to know how to use AI well. So they have to be AI proficient, they have to be AI literate, and they have to know how to use it to their competitive advantage in the workflow optimization. And then the final takeaway from this report is basically the next evolution beyond individual AI agents is agentic web, where autonomous systems can discover, negotiate, and coordinate across the entire internet infrastructure, fundamentally changing how businesses process and operate. So basically, one thing is, you have to move away from brittle workflow driven AI applications. You have to move towards agent. And then this paper says that, going forward, everything would be agentic. It's going to be agentic web. If you want to develop enterprise applications, it has to be in agentic format. So then coming back to my take on this report, how I see this. So basically, one of the very key things which is being, publicized and talked about a lot, 95% of failure rate, that is not how this paper puts it, although they've got those lines there where it talks about 95% failure rate. But then if you go deeper and if you look at the charts and all, it's probably 25% success, right? Which is not so. So my take on all of that, this is basically, this is not the time to be doing enterprise AI applications with rigid workflows. You have to experiment with agentic AI kind of applications, where agents need to and agents have to be designed in such a way where basically they need to have memory, they need to be able to learn, they need to be adaptable. So we have been experimenting at Codefire with a lot of AI kind of applications, and we have already moved on to agentic applications. So I know that, those brittle applications, those fixed kind of applications are not going to work in the marketplace, right? Now, basically, AI is very new. So saying that basically there are so many failures, ultimately people have to try. Enterprises have to try. Unless they try, they would not understand what the full potential of this technology is. So if they try and because this is new, they'll have to fail, right? A lot of failures would be there. Unless you fail, unless you figure out how it works, you will not be able to go to a point where you will be able to do a successful implementation, right? So it's really good to see that a lot of enterprises are trying. Good to see that they are open to failing as well, right? And the AI itself is evolving really fast. Unlike about a year back, we were talking about fixed workflows. Now we are talking about fluid agentic AI applications. We don't know what we will be talking about in near future, right? So that landscape is changing at a very fast pace as well. But not experimenting or not trying is not an option, because if you don't try, somebody else will, and they will learn. So one of the things that this report brings out is basically in-house projects are failing more than vendor-driven projects. So my take on that is basically, even if in-house projects are failing, you have to experiment in-house so that you figure out what exactly works for you or what does not work for you. Then why vendors would be more successful, because they are they're working with a lot of different organizations, they're doing more experimentation, they're completely focused on that, right? So they're bringing a lot of knowledge from implementing successful projects, which is where they're able to drive from the technology side. But from your perspective, from in-house development perspective, if you think that 33% failure rate, you should not even try, that will set you back. That way you'll not be able to learn, and you would not know what questions to ask from vendors. If at all you go back and vendors would come back and tell you that it's 70% success rate or 80% success rate, you would not even know whether you want to ask for 95% success rate or 90% success rate, what exactly the questions you should ask, right? So which is where, do not be deterred by these kind of reports where it says 95% failure or whatever. This is a very new technology. If you don't evolve or adapt quickly, chances are somebody else will, right? So you have to experiment. That is not non-negotiable pretty much from my standpoint, right? And then basically the mindset basically has to be, you have to build quickly, iterate fast, and learn faster. Prioritize usefulness of the application over fear of failure. So basically, identify very narrow kind of application which is not mission critical, and then you implement some AI, and then you figure out whether it's working or not. If it's not, then you try to figure out why it's not working, and then before discarding that, this was a complete failure, you need to get as much learning from that project as possible, so that the next project is a lot better. So that learning has to be done by enterprises and small companies alike. And based on these reports, obviously, we cannot stop experimenting or stop evolving or stop learning. That's what my take on this is. Alrighty, so we've reached the end of the video. Hopefully, you liked the way we went through the report and you understood what the report was talking about. If you have any questions, or if you've got some point that you think I did not cover, or you did not agree with any of the points that I raised, feel free to send me a feedback through comments or messages. As always, thanks so much for watching.